Hello everyone, it's the introverted astrologer here, and I'm back with my current take on all the political leaders here in the UK. Thank you for your continued support and also for the unusual politeness that I've seen over the last year or so with these political videos. I had already prepared the slides for today's video when I read the news, and I was actually genuinely shocked and saddened by Angela Rayner's resignation as Deputy Prime Minister. Now, her chart is under some very strong influences of Uranus, and she's not going to be the only casualty over the next couple of years. Keir Starmer's chart is, of course, also being impacted right now, but there is more to come. Uranus is going to have a profound effect because so many of our leaders have strong mutable energy, particularly looking at Gemini, Virgo, Pisces energy. Before I go any further, I just want to explain that I personally lean towards the left of the political spectrum. I did used to be a paying member of the Labour Party, but I cancelled my membership around 3 years ago, and it was because I had misgivings about Keir Starmer. I'm not currently a paying member of any political party, and when I look at today's charts, I want to be impartial. Uranus is also a planet that is a great awakener to the truth about ourselves and the truth of the situations around us. Right now, Uranus is more a bolt from the blue, throwing shocks and disruptions through the lives of Rayner and Starmer. So let's look at those charts first. Now this is Angela Rayner's chart, and I'll just pull your eye over to this tight T-square that we have going on, running across Taurus and Scorpio and bringing in that Leonine Mars, the node, and Jupiter at the very least, possibly the moon too. Incidentally, this moon could be anywhere between around 26 degrees of Leo and 10 degrees of Virgo. We just don't have a birth time for Angela. So we have quite a few personal planets being caught up in this, and we know this is a strong Mars because it is being amplified by that North Node. Now, during this week, as this issue of Angela's personal finances reached a peak, transiting Uranus was moving through the first degree of Gemini and caught up with Angela's Jupiter for the first time. It was within 3 or 4 minutes of a degree, and this will be one of the main culprits behind the whole fiasco. In fact, you can pick up from looking at this that, of course, transiting Uranus has been moving through late Taurus, and so Angela has been under these Uranian disruptions for a good couple of years. And one of the things that Uranus does, apart from shocking us, is that it excites us. It wakes us up to the truth of situations. We can often move more quickly, feel more impulsive. It electrifies situations. And the contact with Angela's Jupiter is famous for being one of those gambling aspects. We can feel very optimistic with this one, too optimistic. And because we're suffused with all these excitable, risk-taking energies, we can let our guard down. And that is one of the key dangers with difficult Uranus-Jupiter. So we can take risks because our usual caution and prudence is down. In fact, one of the key warnings is to take great care with financial matters because this could bring unexpected expenses, but we could overlook some small detail in our financial dealings and everything begins unravelling with Uranian speed. We've never looked at Rayner's chart before, but if any of you are disappointed about her so sudden departure, don't be too downhearted. Even though we don't have an exact birth time, there is the basic structure here of a strong chart. I had looked at this extremely tight square between Neptune and Saturn, and this would be one of those natal indications not to take chances with details. If something could go wrong, it very well might with this natal potential. So it can be very creative, very artistic, but it can be quite demoralising too. Great self-discipline is needed with this one. Aside from that though, Angela benefits greatly from having 2 pairs of planets in mutual reception, and these placements will give her a lot of support during her life, and there are some interesting interplays in her declinations too. And so this is not going to be the end of Angela Rayner, in my opinion. And I think the next couple of years brings some change for her too. There's that lack of a birth time, but her progressed sun is roughly around 22 degrees of Taurus, and so it's coming up with her natal Venus quite soon. It will go on to contact other parts of her chart, so there are changes ahead. But I suspect Angela will negotiate these with her usual determination. Now, would we see this week's events mirrored in Keir Starmer's chart? Angela Rayner actually has some significant overlap with Starmer's positions, and they are actually both sharing that very unpleasant jolt from Uranus. We know that his leadership of the Labour Party is just over a year into its term. The last membership figures that we had released for the Labour Party were back in February, and the number of paying Labour members has dropped away dramatically. Now, after February, of course, we had the fiasco relating to disability cuts, and I'm suspicious that an immense amount of supporters fell away at that time. I'll just explain to you, by the way, that there still is no official birth time for Keir Starmer. One of my viewers had dowsed for a time and they'd arrived at 6:48 in the morning. So this is hypothetical. The reason why I feel there could be something in it is that, of course, Jupiter would have been passing over the midheaven of his chart at the time he was elected. Moreover, his solar return with this morning time was also very favourable back in the 2024 elections. Now, what we can see in Keir Starmer's chart, regardless of the birth time, is this strong amount of placements over the Virgo-Pisces axis. And in this kind of area, we were looking at Angela Rayner's cluster of planets too. So you can see that big overlap in Virgo energy. For what it's worth, Rachel Reeves too has a couple of things in Virgo. In her case, it is Moon, Saturn and the node in Virgo. So we're having these shared sympathies between these key players in the Labour government. And so this is going to set these charts up for some interesting developments over the next 2 or 3 years. Now, in the same way that Uranus in that first degree of Gemini triggered off Rayner's natal Jupiter, it has been forming its transit by square to Keir's natal Uranus. And I'd actually started drafting my video on all of the current leaders a few days ago, before anything was hinting at an imminent resignation. And the key things that I'd wanted to get across to viewers about this Uranus squaring its own position was that Keir would have this disruption, or the unexpected, and that the purpose of this disruption or the jolt would be to awaken Keir Starmer, to shock him into awareness and ask him that he be true to his deepest self. This tension or irritation brought in by Uranus might ask him to make adjustments in ways that he hadn't expected. There could be very significant feelings of frustration, of tension. I asked myself whether this in itself would be enough to oust Starmer from his position, but I found that most unlikely. And in its own way, this Uranus square to Uranus has manifested as exactly that, because of course there's been this shock, the need to adjust to circumstances around him, to get to the truth. Uranus of the matter, moreover to also be true to himself. And whatever my personal feelings about Keir Starmer might be, the fact of the matter is that the whole affair has been handled by an outside ethics advisor who seems to have been quite impartial in arriving at the decision that he did, which is that Rayner failed to take specialist tax advice at the time. And so Keir Starmer has had to be true to a commitment that he made as he was elected, which is that there would be honour in government and that he wouldn't put up with members of government who behaved with anything less than full personal integrity and upheld the highest standards. And so we can see that under difficult circumstances, Keir Starmer has nonetheless been true to himself. Now, this shock that has been delivered by Uranus has been quite significant. It's dominated headlines, and that is just Uranus square Uranus. And what I can see is that pivotal characters in government like Keir Starmer and also Rachel Reeves are going to come under increasing pressure over the next 2 or 3 years. I did think it would be of such magnitude that it is unlikely Keir Starmer will be in position by the time we have the next election. This has to be no later than August of 2029, and I'll very quickly recap on the immense amount of difficulties and adjustments that Keir is going to have to make over the next few years. I think this government is going to sort of limp into 2026, and Starmer will have a couple of tricky Saturn transits, ones that last for a few months during 2026. Initially, I suspect that Saturn will be having an ongoing opposition transit to his moon, and this can be a time of emotional malnourishment or unhappiness. We may be working so hard that we can't find emotional self-expression. There may be sadnesses around the wife, etc. There will also be a square between transiting Saturn and Mars in Cancer. So there could be great frustrations and tensions, a feeling of being blocked and frustrated, literally seething inside as we meet impediments and setbacks that stop us achieving what we want. So great caution and tolerance will be needed during this year, but I think the problems really start mounting up as we move into 2027, because by now Uranus will have moved further into Gemini and it will begin to square with Keir's Sun and Pluto. The Sun is a personal planet, of course, and a very sensitive one. And so what has happened during this past week will be a walk in the park compared to how events will unfold in a couple of years' time. Jupiter and Chiron are also going to be caught up in these squares too, and I couldn't understate how tricky this will be to manoeuvre through. But also during 2027, transiting Pluto is going to be on Keir's Saturn. It will be a ruthless breaking down and transforming patterns of living, our structures of life, the way that we live our life, what we take for granted and feel comfortable with, perhaps also our ego defences, our mechanisms by which we control our own ego energies. They too can be torn down quite brutally with this Pluto conjunction. Neptune in 2027 will be opposing Starmer's natal Mercury. This may well begin 2026 if Keir was born even earlier in the day, but certainly by 2027 that vulnerability will be there in terms of Starmer's communications, his processing, his interactions with other people, anything to do with his writing, speech, contracts, possibly also related to finances, because this may well be bringing in second house energy, the second house of values and resources. And so this would be a year for Keir to be extremely careful about every little detail, to be transparent and honest, because The potential for leaks or exposure is very strong. The facts of a matter could easily get very distorted and confused. This Neptune will also square with Keir's natal Mars in 2027. And because of Neptune's very slow motion and the fact that it turns retrograde, this can go on into 2028 too. So I hope I'm getting over quite how much Keir will have to deal with. Could it get any worse? Yes, because Saturn will be in late Aries in 2027 and it will oppose with Keir's natal Venus. This could play out in relationships with females, with our finances. An opposition can sometimes indicate that an important decision, one that makes us unhappy, will need to be made. And so I hope I've conveyed to you quite how much Keir has to deal with in 2027. And these will be lengthy transits. They will be with him into 2028 too. The pressure will be so significant. The other political leaders who are going to be greatly impacted by Uranus include Nigel Farage. So we'll have a look at his chart now. Now, I haven't looked at Farage's years ahead between now and, say, summer 2029. And because we are blessed with an approximate birth time, we have so many more tools at our disposal. Now, this birth time doesn't come from a birth certificate, but I am reasonably confident in it because at the time that he was successful in becoming an MP last summer, Jupiter was transiting over his midheaven. And we can also see that Uranus at the moment is hovering quite close to his Venus. I know that this weekend is the UK Reform Party's conference in Birmingham. Farage has had a busy week and I've seen a few clips of him speaking before the US Congress earlier this week too. So this is a time of high excitement for Farage. Venus can say something about our personal relationships with people, about money. It can also speak of socialising patterns, and Uranus is electrifying and invigorating these areas of life. This Uranus will also have contacted by square with his natal Saturn. And this transit can bring some difficulties because we could see Saturn as having a vested interest in keeping things as they are, stable, predictable, to living up to commitments, responsibilities and expectations. And Uranus is a planet of freedom. We don't want to be restricted. Moreover, some of those strictures that feel unbearable at this time may actually be holding us back from expressing our fullest potential. So Uranus can bring in great tension and force us to break free from jobs, relationships, commitments that are actually holding us back. I'm not sure at this stage how this is playing out in Farage's life, but I have no doubt that it is. I'm sure you're probably aware that this Uranus will be slowly moving forward through Gemini, and of course there will be a point at which it roughly connects with the area of Farage's midheaven. The midheaven that speaks of his career, his profession, his status out there in the public world. And there will be this simultaneous square to Uranus's own natal position, a transit which we know Keir Starmer has been on the receiving end of this week. So there's no question that we have big changes ahead for Farage. Uranus is unpredictable, and if you consider that it was Uranus passing over Donald Trump's midheaven that was symbolic of him being convicted as a felon and also being successful in his battle for presidency, that unpredictability is so strong that I'm struggling at present to understand how this will play out in Farage's life. We're initially looking at roughly 2027, so some disruption, but potentially some achievements too in the area of career are possible. We have looked at Farage's chart briefly, and we know that he has quite an active 8th house. Now, the 8th house is where we find the more intense topics of life. It can be an area of deaths, of rebirths, of the occult. There's transformation, intensity. There could be periodic crises in our life if we have a strong 8th house. And our emotions are intense too. We know that transiting Neptune and Saturn are going to become precisely conjunct with each other next spring. And they are both going to be moving through Farage's 8th house. Saturn will move into Aries good and proper in 2026. And so it's going to make an ongoing lengthy transit with Farage's Sun. It will pass over that Mars briefly, but it won't be an ongoing transit in the way that the one with the Sun will. Saturn on Sun can be a very realistic time. There could be self-examination in this as part of the process. We will be looking at how far we've come, where we still want to go. We might be carefully measuring whether we've got the recognition that we wanted, or whether that too requires further work. Things that we want to achieve will be very important to us, but also our energy and self-confidence can be a bit lower under this kind of Saturn-Sun connection, and so we may look hard at things that we can possibly let go of so that we can strip away any dead wood and invest all our energy and work into things which are of value. Saturn is bringing in that great strategic practicality. Now, this transition itself can bring reduced confidence for some time, but Neptune is also going to conjunct with Farage's Mars during 2026. Neptune on Mars can also have quite a depleting effect because Mars represents our energy, how we plough all that energy into the direction we want to go, how we act out to get what we want. Neptune does not assist us in things which are related to action and goals connected with our human egos. Neptune can blur. It's a very spiritual energy, but also a planet that can make things very confused. So feeling low on energy, feeling somewhat demoralised and possibly fatigued are possible too. So we have both Saturn and Neptune making 2026 not necessarily a year of catastrophe, but a year where checks and balances and some draining is possible. As the years to the election tick down, Uranus will be progressing further into the sign of Gemini, and so it will form square transits with Farage's Pluto and Chiron. By this time I can also see that his progressed Sun will be in the area of making a square with his Chiron too. And so there is a bit of a health alert here, or a potential for some wounding. And I do note also that Farage's progressed Moon will have moved into his intense 8th house, the house of potential crises, in 2026, and so it will still be moving through this house during 2027 and 2028. And I'm not bringing this up as a way of suggesting that the Reform Party won't be successful, not at all. I'm bringing it up as an alert that there may be some crises or struggles that Farage has to work through as we move towards the next election. I had a quick look at his solar return, which covers up to the first few months of 2029, and it looks quite promising. I have to say that this chart, in comparison with Keir Starmer's chart, there's no doubt in my mind that Farage is not doing too badly. He has nowhere near the burden and disruption that I can see coming in Keir Starmer's chart. And now we come to Jeremy Corbyn. I did a video on him a couple of weeks ago, and I had explained how transiting Uranus is going to make quite a few aspects with his natal chart over the next few years. There is no formally evidenced birth time for Corbyn as such, but the official birth chart for him has been rectified by an astrologer. Now, as discussed, Uranus is unpredictable, and whilst I do anticipate lucky breaks for Corbyn, especially moving further into 2026, there could be some disruption. I don't think it's going to overturn him from his course of action, and it is more likely that the energetic, exciting, unexpected qualities of Uranus will be coming through too. The majority of transits that Corbyn will be experiencing are the so-called easier transits, the trines, the sextiles. Pluto in particular will be connecting up with his Sun, giving him further opportunities to step strongly into his own power. There will be work involved, and even trines can bring difficulties. They simply remove friction or resistance so that there's an easier flow of energy between the Pluto and Sun. His progressed moon will probably be in Aries as we reach election year. And I notice that the current figures for the number of people who have signed up to your party exceeds 800,000. Now, those figures are showing support for the movement, but they are not actually paying members. So we'll have to see how Corbyn's new direction unfolds over the next few years. Are there any extreme barriers that would block him from becoming more and more successful? Not really, no. Similar to Farage, there will be a few trickier moments. There is nothing like the scale of difficulties that are going to face Starmer. I do notice that the eclipse, which takes place on UK time Sunday, the 7th of September, at around 15 degrees of Pisces, is going to fall on this IC, the part of Corbyn which is speaking of roots and foundation and security. It's a very sensitive angle when an eclipse hits it, and perhaps there is something that will move through Corbyn's life during this eclipse season. It's a lunar eclipse, so I wouldn't consider it as strong as the solar eclipse, and we'll have to see if anything comes of this. There are a few potential symbolisms with this eclipse, including responsibilities around paperwork, potentially some tiredness or depleted health. There may be concerns about loved ones, and the IC is the angle in the chart which speaks of family or roots. Let's see what happens there. Corbyn's solar return for closer to the potential election year, 2029, is showing Jupiter near his midheaven, and that's very promising. Who will be the leader of this new party when it's named? I've watched Corbyn being interviewed, and his words were along the lines of, he is not ruling himself in and he's not ruling himself out. He's here to serve. So we'll see who emerges as the leader of this party in due course. Now we'll move quickly to Badenoch's birth chart. Badenoch is the leader of the Conservative Party, and their membership figures have shown a steady fall year on year for quite some time. Sadly, there's no evidenced birth time, nor is there a rectified birth chart, but we can see that whatever time of day Badenoch was born, there is that full moon energy, the sun-moon contacts. This moon is probably around the area of roughly 6 degrees of Cancer through to 18 of Cancer. It aspects the sun no matter what time of day she's born. And we can see some starting difficulties next year. This will be when a transit from Saturn, a lengthy transit at that, certainly starts aspecting her sun by square. So things begin getting somewhat tougher in spring of 2026, and because it's a lengthier contact from Saturn, this will go through to 2027 too. Saturn may well be contacting her moon simultaneously, in which case this really would be extremely difficult, I'd anticipate. If her natal moon is somewhere between the region of 7 or 8 Cancer through to roughly 15 degrees of Cancer, then this could be a very challenging Saturn transit, doubly so. May there be a change to Conservative Party leadership? This certainly would be a time when our ambitions were challenged and thwarted. If the moon is involved too, this could be very demoralising and lonely time. There are many strengths to this chart, and it's easy to understand why Badenoch is popular with her own party. I'm not sure that she's making a great impact on the general public though. If she could stay in her position through to 2029, by this time Saturn has entered Taurus territory and will be offering chances to make keen, determined progress. But a bit like Angela Rayner and Keir Starmer, Badenoch too has a good dollop of mutable energy in the sign of Virgo, And so she too is going to be impacted by the transits of Uranus. And similar to Angela Rayner, she will have the square to her natal Jupiter, first becoming within orb later in 2027. Her Mars will likely be affected too. Neptune too will be on the area of 11 degrees of Aries in spring 2029. And so what this means is that this confusing and demoralising Neptune Sun energy would be active if she made it through to 2029. There isn't a great deal of help going to be given to Badenoch over the next few years. I think the Saturn transits in 2026 are going to be very testing. And we do have the general issue at the moment that both the Tory and Labour governments are slowly and increasingly falling out of favour. Now, interest in the metaphysical or more spiritual tools that we can use to look at life, well, it actually runs in my family to a certain extent. And my mother is very keen on graphology and numerology. She's practiced graphology analysis for quite a few decades now and even taught it in the community at some point. So I did ask her if she could take a look at Keir Starmer's letter to Angela Rayner. You can see the letter here, and we are missing some essential details for a proper exhaustive graphology analysis. Those details are things like whether Keir Starmer could see lines through the paper that he was writing on. What pen was he using? That's very important to establish the pressure and whether the pressure is consistent. There's all these little details that we don't have. But on the strength of these 3 pages, this is what my mother had to say. She thought that Starmer was distancing himself from his own past and that this was increasing as time went by. There are some issues with planning and following through on plans. He's not a person who's afraid to be different, but neither is he somebody who is exceptionally warm and friendly towards his fellow human beings. Now, the key drivers in his life will be the more traditional rewards of money, of status, societal standing. There is possibility of quite a grasping nature too when it comes to those more conventional rewards. There is a very clear head. However, it's accompanied by very little imagination, and so there is a more robotic streak here. My mother wasn't entirely sure that Angela was Keir Starmer's favourite person at the time he was writing this letter. You can see as it moves on from page 1 over to page 2 and 3, there is that gradual deterioration in writing and legibility. I was curious as to whether there would be signs of quite an inflated ego. My mother doesn't think there is. There is some ego because we don't achieve these higher roles in society without putting ourselves first at some point. However, it isn't so inflated that he loses his perspective. He does see himself at the centre of things, and he can instigate some very controlled beginnings. But taking things through over the longer term is where it gets trickier for him. He is increasingly finding it difficult to keep up appearances. And I think we could see from the gradual deterioration over the course of this letter that this is a matter which is causing some upset and frustration. I find all this quite fascinating because I know nothing about graphology myself. I hope you've got something from today's video, and I will be back very soon with the next one. Until then though, have a good weekend. Enjoy Sunday's lunar eclipse, and God bless you and your families. Take care.